Are you ready for pain? Are you ready for suffering? If the answer is yes, then you're ready.
DE&I, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always like to say that out loud because I think people are shy and they don't want to ask, and then you go Google it, but that's what it means. I think it as like a basic starting point. Sometimes organizations will want to do DEI, and the idea will be, well, we need a more diverse workforce. I need to hire more Asians. I need to hire more Black people. I want people from the LGBTQ plus community on my team. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. But the first thing that people need to do, or leaders need to do, is ensure that the work environment that they're bringing these individuals into, because they don't have these different people in their organization, is a healthy and safe place to bring them into. Because if it's not, and if it's not what we call inclusive, and if they don't feel like they belong and they don't feel safe, then they will leave very quickly, and you'll end up in the same situation you were in the very beginning.
So if you haven't heard, Governor Kevin Stitt signed an executive order that would essentially dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within higher ed institutions. He has labeled these programs as discriminatory, exclusive, and bad for business. And as a recent college graduate, someone that benefited and is a product of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as well as currently serving as an Oklahoma legislator, I'm sharing this video in an attempt to reclaim the narrative on what these programs actually are. DEI programs in schools essentially serve as resource hubs for students that need a bit of an extra push to be successful in school. This includes students that are first generation, so they're first in their family to go to college, students that come from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities, veterans, minority students, as well as non-traditional students that might be coming back into their college careers. And no, I was never indoctrinated, but I was encouraged to foster a community where I was surrounded by people that didn't always look like me or speak like me or shared my background. And that's okay. I know that because I engaged in conversations with people that didn't always identify the same way I did, then it made all of us just better people. Not only that, but businesses also recognize just how valuable these programs are because they put their money into them, since they contribute to having a more educated and diverse workforce, which means that these programs are also workforce development as well as economic development. So with that, I want to leave you with a call to action. Let's reclaim the narrative on what diversity, equity, and inclusion programs actually are and share our stories. So I encourage you to share your story on how diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have impacted your life or the life of a friend.
What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? So for me, I think I look at them each in individual buckets. So for me, diversity means that in every place and space, there's a diverse group represented. So with workforce, that means that the people who work on our job sites are diverse either in race and gender. It means for the businesses that we hire as subcontractors to work for us, that those business owners are diverse in race, gender, business size, right? So a small business and a large business, that's also a form of diversity. So always being certain that there's that type of diversity. And then within Powers and Sons, that there's diversity in race and gender with who works for us in every space. And then the equity is, I always picture, if you've seen the cartoon where it shows the difference between equality and equity. And it talks about, like, equality is everyone gets, one of the popular, I guess, images is like a picture of fence that's taller than everyone that is there, right? And everyone gets a 6-inch block to stand on because that's equal. But if you are 6 foot tall and you get a 6-inch block versus you're 5 feet tall and you get a 6-inch block, that puts you at a very different vantage point for being able to see over the fence. So that's equality. But equity means I'm going to give everyone whatever size block they need in order to be able to stand up to be able to see over the fence. So What that means is that what one business may need or one person may need in order to be successful may be very different than what another person or entity may need to be successful. And sometimes I think we struggle because we assume that because an individual is diverse or a business is diverse, they all need the same kind of help. And we come at it like, well, you must need this because you're a Black business or because you're a woman. So this must be what you need. But that might not necessarily be what I need in order to be at an equitable position. And then inclusion to me means that, okay, I've created these spaces where there's a diverse group of people, but everyone needs to feel included. And just because you've created a space that looks diverse doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in that space feels included. Right. So that means creating a safe space where people can feel safe to be their authentic selves, and that their authentic self is welcomed and respected and appreciated. And that is kind of the last piece I think that sometimes gets overlooked, and it's why sometimes efforts at diversity and equity fail, because there isn't that last bit to make sure that people feel included.
This video is for everybody who is committed to diversity and inclusion. Let's talk about how to measure diversity and inclusion. Measuring diversity and inclusion is not linear. It is so complex, and actions speak louder than words. Therefore, an institution or a company's commitment to anti-racism and diversity and inclusion is not outlined in purely a policy. It is not outlined in a statement or an action plan. It is outlined in who they hire, who they support, the type of people that they progress, and why. Watch how an institution treats those who are doing the work. This goes further if seeing if there is a diverse leadership. This goes further than filling a quota, and it certainly goes further than tokenism. Evaluating diversity and inclusion takes critical consciousness. It takes empathy. It takes a multicultural perspective and analysis. We must continue to strive for inclusivity.
Teachers, hiring season is among us. Let's go over interview questions that will for sure throw you off. I've already gone over commonly asked interview questions, and it's under my interview prep playlist. However, I've been getting lots of requests for addressing questions that are a little bit tougher to answer. Starting with this one, how do you address inclusion, equity, and diversity within your classroom and your practice? I want to start off by saying that these are all intertwined concepts, and they are vital in order to create a culturally responsive, diverse classroom for your students. It's also important to note that these are not concepts that can be taught as standalone lessons, and it's a process that needs to be integrated into every fiber of your teaching practice, which takes time. So no, you can't do one social studies lesson addressing diversity and call it a day. It needs to be intertwined into your math, your social studies, your science, your health and career. You get the point. The foundation of inclusion, equity, and diversity starts by getting to know your student. There is no way that you are going to do any of this within your practice if you don't know who your students are. I do this right from the beginning of the year because the ultimate goal is to have your students feel heard and seen within your classroom. Have them bring in objects, stories, pictures that relate to their social identity. Sift through your teaching materials, see how your students are being represented within the materials that you're using. Diversity needs to be integrated throughout your classroom. Having that one token ethnic child in a textbook doesn't count. That's B for bare minimum. I'm going to give you a specific example. When I taught at a school that had a large South Asian population, and I taught a unit on food, instead of just addressing random foods, I mindfully picked out foods that my students ate at home and integrated it within my lesson plans. Students were ecstatic to be talking about dal and roti. I now teach at a school that has a large Asian population. I include resources that have students that look like them. My slides that I use for math have pictures that look like them. I bring up topics from their culture. I allow my students to have a voice within my classroom. They are part of the planning process. You need to use different materials to connect your students that you have that year within your classroom and within your lessons. Inclusion also means that you are accommodating to different learning styles. You need to give specific examples of how you're doing this. Equity is a big one. Equity and equality are not the same thing. Equity within education means that every child has the resources that they need in order to be successful, regardless of their background, their socioeconomic status, their culture, religion. I always like to think of this picture when I'm thinking about equity. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Now take a look at these animals. Being quote unquote fair is not the same as being equitable.
Address your own biases when it comes to inclusion, equity, and diversity. If you're not a member of the BIPOC community, you might want to look at your biases a little harder. Always ask yourself, how would you want to be seen and represented within the school? And do the same for your students.
Hi everyone, I'm Celine Gomese, and I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives at Sanofi. And I'm going to share with you 3 things I'm most excited about in the DE&I space at Sanofi in 2023. So the first thing that I want to talk about is our fellowship program with Howard University, a historically Black university, otherwise known as an HBCU. It is a way for us to build the next generation of BIPOC leaders into the healthcare industry and to help close the healthcare disparities that exist. The second thing I want to talk about is representation of race and gender at Sanofi. We've set an aspiration for representation of women in senior leadership to be 50% by 2025, and representation of people of color to be 37% by 2025. And last but certainly not least, the third initiative that I'm excited to share with you is a new global initiative at Sanofi called A Million Conversations. A Million Conversations focuses on rebuilding trust between the healthcare industry and underrepresented groups such as Black and ethnic minority groups, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ+ community, and women. These 3 things demonstrate how we're moving the needle within DE&I, and it's great to see the tangible results that come from it.
I think it's important that we consider diversity, equity, and inclusion as a change management process. And we need to apply the same strategy to DEI that we would to any other process within a company. Often it's kind of a feel-good initiative or there's an altruistic motivation, but we need the same kind of strategy that we would apply anywhere else in an organization, right? And so when we think about change management, that means we need to role model good behavior. We need to build people's skill and their capacity. We need to create formal systems and structures and put them in place to actually help the change take effect within the organization. So a change management process, not an initiative, not something that's good, but a change management process. Leadership commitment. You have to have commitment from the top of the organization, from the C-suite all the way down and then across the enterprise. Without leadership, it's something that's a good idea, but people really don't have direction. The other thing is to know your starting point. So if you're thinking about diversity, is that women? Are you looking at veterans? Are you looking at age? Are you looking at race? How do you know where you're starting? And then once you know where you're starting, how are you going to measure progress across those demographic categories? And then how will you know if your outcomes are really different? So you need both short-term metrics, but also long-term metrics, so you know if you're making progress. And then I think another thing that helps companies to get started is to be transparent, right? And that means communicating. Sometimes companies will say, well, we don't really want to talk about this because people will then know. I know it comes as a surprise, but people already know. They come there every day. People know what's going on. So be transparent. Communicate your metrics internally to internal stakeholders and externally to the community, partners, and other companies.
Oh yes, I'm completely open-minded. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I went to primary school with a boy who painted his nails. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What people do in their own time is completely up to them, isn't it? Yeah. Sexuality, yeah, no problem. Yeah, as long as they keep it private, obviously. And the gender thing, yeah, no, I'm sure that's fine. Yeah. I mean, we had some Spanish people moving up the road. Oh, actually, they might be Mexican. But anyway, it turns out they're very nice. Yeah. No, I embrace it. Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have an equality policy of some sort. I think they call it DEI now. Yeah. What does it stand for again? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm not really quite sure the difference between equity and equality, but someone did tell me about it. Something to do with where you start off or something. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Does the policy change how I behave at work? No. Do I refer to the policy when I'm recruiting? Well, I mean, we just don't get many diverse people applying, if I'm honest. Yeah. I mean, there's me and Alice and Janet, obviously. We're women. And then there's Derek, who lives with a man. Yeah. And Sanjay. Yeah. So we're pretty diverse. Yeah, but I suppose we could have a bit more of a diverse workforce, but I don't really know how we'd go about it. I think we should be a bit more proactive in our recruitment policy. Interesting.
So this is a great question because I ended up getting this question quite a bit in my interviews. So let's talk about it. For anyone new to my page, my name is Celine. I'll be starting at Stanford University's PA program in a couple of weeks, and I'm just here to share what I learned when I was applying to PA school. There's a lot of different ways, obviously, that you can go about answering this question, but there's two very simple and effective methods that I found. So, of course, if you have any personal experiences with the topic of diversity and inclusion, that's a great time to tell this story. But another great option is to also tell a story about a healthcare experience that touches on this topic. I personally did a mix of both of these. So for example, both of my parents were born outside of the United States, so English wasn't their first language. And I also understand how difficult it is to come to America without speaking English because I've seen that with my grandparents. So I related that back to what I saw in the offices that I worked at and kind of working with patients who don't speak English. A lot of situations where I've encountered the patient spoke Spanish and not English, and I took roughly 6 years of Spanish, so I really did do my best always to try and help the patients. And then I tied these experiences into an explanation as to why it's so important to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in the healthcare field so that patients feel more comfortable. And I also touched on the idea that without a fluent Spanish speaker, patients that speak only Spanish can misunderstand what I'm telling them. They are going to have more difficulty understanding the full scope of the diagnosis and the treatment plan. And so although I did my very best, it is super important to have this sort of inclusivity within healthcare because it impacts patients directly. So I essentially put all of those mini topics into a story, and that was the answer that I told in my interviews. And I think that this is a topic that I'm really passionate about because of my also personal experiences. And I think that definitely reflected in the response that I gave. Okay, I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any other questions.
If you're working on developing a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for a company, this video is for you. So I have an online program for people who are building out DEI strategies for companies. It's called DEI Blueprint. And I just had a really cool idea. I am going to critique one of my very first DEI strategies that I've developed, and give you some insight into how I provide feedback for the people that are part of DEI Blueprint. So the way the program is set up, if they join the full version, they have the opportunity to submit their assignments and templates for feedback from me. So as they're building out the foundation of the DEI strategy, the goals, metrics, KPIs, I give them feedback on the stuff that they've developed. So this is going to be a series, and that won't fit into 3 minutes. So we're going to break it up into pieces. The first piece will be what I call the DEI Foundation, and it includes the VMVs. I refer to the vision, mission, and values as VMVs. And I'm going to show you what I created back in the day for this international nonprofit. Okay, this is the vision and mission. I had to crop it out because even though this is a public facing document, I didn't want to include anyone's pictures in my videos. But screenshot this. And now here are the values. At the time, I was on a very tight time crunch. I only had 4 months to develop this whole entire strategy. And the nonprofit is international, by the way. And these were the values they had picked out before I even got there, and I just went with it. I added cultural competence because it aligned with the overarching mission of the company. And then they just defined DEI as it relates to what they do in the company. So they just aligned it with their branding and how they felt they implement. I want to go back to the vision. Though it is very straightforward and it includes futuristic, lofty goals, like you see, they say working with children around the world, which they already do. It seems very basic and generic. The mission statement is way too long and complex and has unnecessary words that are they're filler words, meaning they don't really add anything to the mission statement.
Here's why DEI. I'm going to tackle a topic that seems to be getting a lot of attention, and I believe the main issue is due to rhetoric and how things are defined. It is with churches and affirming of the LG plus community. And I say LG plus because I do not want to be politically incorrect due to the large volume of people that are included in this community. So with churches, I'm going to say in the topic of affirming, that word means a lot of different things. You don't have to be affirming of someone that drinks. You don't have to be affirming of their behaviors and what they do. If it's drugs, you don't have to be affirming of people that own cats if you like dogs. However, it is wrong to be prejudiced and discriminatory towards somebody and not be inclusive of them because of what category or demographic they fall into. Yes, be inclusive of people that are in the LG communities, inclusive of people that deal with alcoholism, inclusive of people of all demographics and backgrounds, but you don't have to be affirming of anything. And that's all right for everyone. You got to understand the difference between affirming and inclusive. The world needs to be more inclusive, but you don't have to be affirming of everything. And also, doing so and not understanding that can lead to prejudice and discrimination. And when it becomes a prejudice or discrimination thing, that's crossing the lines and that's not appropriate for anyone. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up and we can discuss more reasons why DEI is important and needed for everyone.
Dr. Martin here. Do you want to know some of the top advice I provide to DEI professionals when I'm doing consultation? Stop trying to appeal to individuals' humanity when you're trying to get stuff done. What do you mean, Dr. Martin? Well, one of the two top issues that contribute to the significant difficulties for Black people and people of the global majority is dehumanization and adultification. They don't see us as humanity and can't appeal to our humanity because they feel like we have none. And they think that our children are adults and treat them as such, which is incredibly inappropriate. However, when you're trying to get stuff done, you're trying to be like, well, this is wrong. This is racist. This is patriarchal. This is ableist. This is oppressive. These are things that appeal to someone's humanity as what is right or wrong. Stop doing that. Let me tell you what you do. Hey, I was looking at the books and you guys are complaining about not being in Black. You know, you guys spend $50,000 a year to retrain new professionals. You know, if your environment was less racist, people would stop leaving. Hey, I see that you have to pay $20K a year for advertising. What's that for? For marketing. Oh, that's specifically for marketing positions to hire people. Well, if you guys were all full up and retaining the individuals that you had, you would stop spending $20K on that. It'd be great if people wanted to stop being racist because racism harms everyone, not just people of the global majority. It'd be great if people wanted to stop being patriarchal because patriarchy harms everyone, not just women. Harms men and non-binary individuals. It'd be great. However, appealing to individuals' humanity sometimes does not work. So you know what I appeal to? Something that they can all recognize. The bottom line. The productivity. The money. Yeah. So if you want my advice, and you feel like you keep hitting the wall, not being able to get the budget approved for that, not being able to have them attend that training, bring in that professional and pay them what they're worth, and follow up with tangible objectives of how we're going to combat the oppression in the environment. Not just saying we're going to stop being oppressive, saying, oh, well, we are having this. These are the metrics of what is coming up as institutional oppression. This is how we're going to follow up to make sure that this is being decreased, and this is what we're going to follow up to see to look at the change of the metric of oppression in this institutional oppression in this environment. Because it's not only about let's say we're going to do this. You need tangible metrics and dates when you're going to follow up on that, and what happens if it doesn't decrease or increase the way we want it to. You need that. Appeal to the bottom line, y'all. And I know some people, I've told some people this and they're like, yes, you know, it just makes it seem like some people don't care and I want them to care. I get that. But you know what? Remember who your audience is, one. And also remember who you're trying to help. I don't care whether or not you care about the fact that bringing in this licensed mental health professional and paying for the groups weekly for these employees is going to improve their mental health. I just care that you write the check. However, when the employees come to me and tell me how much this has helped them in their work environment, I care about that. So they're who I'm trying to help. Just write the check, Bill.